Eddie Thornton, welcome to another episode of Sonoma Voices.
Hello, thank you for having me, Nat. I'm glad to be here.
Such a pleasure. Well, if I get to introduce Eddie, if I get to introduce you, I would probably need an hour. But what first comes to mind is, Eddie, you are a published author of this book, Stolen. When I say the word stolen and look at this book and touch the book, I have goosebumps all over my body. Trust me. This is the only book I've ever read that has a disclaimer. Would you like to tell me how did you decide to write the book? A little bit, something about the disclaimer?
Well, when I first got into art school, I went from having a inner city childhood and upbringing, and had the opportunity to go to art school, which is a private school in downtown Chicago. Most of the kids, they were from the suburbs. And the more I got to know them, the more we had conversations, they found out about my background. And the conversation that kept coming up was, why are you not dead or in jail? They would ask me. So I would tell the story and I'd tell it again. And, the more people they meet, the more people wanted to know. And after several dozen times of telling the story, I thought, well, there seems to be people who are interested in either my background or the process that I went through for my life and life changes, that I should probably write this down. Maybe somebody would find it interesting. So that was the root of the decision to write the book.
I can only assume, but I want to ask you, while you were writing the book, was it hard emotionally? Because we are talking about the hard upbringing and an abuse that you went through. Was it hard and therapy for you? How did it feel?
That's a great point. Yes, it was hard and it was therapy. The difficulty in it, trauma likes to bury itself. So reconnecting with some of the violent events of my often childhood took a lot of work. And so the process of going back in my mind into those times and those places and those events was very traumatic. Not as traumatic as being there, but very traumatic. So there's some stories that I could only work on for small periods of time. Have to, write a few sentences and take a break and come back the next day and write a few more sentences. Some of the stories that were funny were obviously easier to go through and less less re-traumatizing, I should say. But the therapy is in the writing of those passages. Again, like I mentioned, trauma tends to bury things. And the rewriting of some of those things, in the process of going through my history and uncovering them, I also uncovered the way I felt at the time. Because at the time, you're just trying to survive it, right? You're not thinking about, oh, this makes me feel terrified, or I think I'm going to die, or anything like that. You're just thinking about how do I get out of here alive? So, and then after you get out, you're just relieved that you're not there anymore. So you're not processing any kind of emotional work there. So years later, in the process of writing it, uncovering these emotions and experiencing them and allowing myself to experience them and then deal with them to process them was a really cathartic process.
I am sure it was. I was holding this book, Stolen, Stories from a Violent Childhood. So that's what's stolen, your childhood.
Yes.
This book and your style of writing brought every emotion out of me, including physically shaking, laughing, smiling through tears, crying, shaking. I wanted to know more. I wanted to read this in one afternoon. Not possible. It's a pretty thick book. I didn't let it down until I finished the book. I read some testimonials on Amazon. Other people experience the same thing. I know you said a lot of people are interested. Who do you think this book is for?
You know, when I was writing it, I was just trying to think about how, what I would want to hear and what I would want to read. So I was trying to just make it as truthful and as interesting as I could. And as far as an audience, I wasn't thinking about an audience in particular, but I've found that people who've gone through abuse have enjoyed reading it. People who've gone through violence in their backgrounds have enjoyed reading it. People with kids who are going through difficulties, behavioral orders, behavioral issues have told me that they've read it and gave it to their kids, their high school children. So it doesn't seem to have found one particular niche more than anyone else, because people who've never experienced the type of things I've gone through have told me they found it interesting reading too. So yeah, so long story short, I didn't have a particular audience other than the people that I had been speaking with and the people who had found my story interesting. It was just a continuation of that.
For me, it's more fascinating than interesting. I would want this to be less painful for you. You want to hear how I felt as far as I remember, the abuse started when you were 3 years old. You're right.
Three, 4.
So you don't even
Well,
have.
technically, you could say it started at the age of 2 when my father was murdered. So yeah. And then 4 is when my mother remarried to my stepfather, who was the most abusive person.
Well, I personally wanted to hug the 2-year-old Eddie and a 10-year-old, an 18-year-old. And I, as a mother, I wanted to protect you from what you were going through, obviously not possible in real life. But you and I talked about this many times, and I promise you it's not the last time right now, because it's fascinating to me.
Thank you.
And you mentioned last time, when I asked you who made the biggest difference in your life so you are not dead, maybe some luck, but also there must be someone, a teacher, a coach, someone in your environment that caused you to turn your life around and be who you are today. Remember that teacher that said, look around you in the classroom.
It was a series of people and things that helped me turn my life around. Part of it was me making decisions where I would find myself at a crossroads of some sort. There'd be an event happening, and in my head, I knew that this was an important point. Whether I go left or go right here would be a big deal, even as a kid. And then there were people who I've been pretty lucky in that throughout my life, I've managed to learn to take lessons from other people's failures, I should say. I would see people make decisions that didn't turn out well, and I would, use that as a lesson. Say, do not do what that person just did. So there were those decisions along the way, but ultimately, my mother, flawed human being, even though she married this abusive person and she stayed in that abusive relationship for a decade of my childhood, she was still a good person. A lot of people who've had good lives tend to think that, bad things happen to bad people, and if they weren't bad, they wouldn't be in those situations. But, bad things can happen to anybody at any time. So she, while she didn't make the best choices, she still was a good person. She went to her job every day. She never cheated anybody out of anything. So she was kind of the exact opposite of my stepfather in a lot of ways. So I got to see that. My sister, she's 5 years older than me, and even though we went through the same abuse, she retreated into her studies and into school, whereas I retreated into the streets and into violence. So seeing her go to school every day, get good grades. All the teachers loved her, while all my teachers hated me. So seeing that, she and I were both in the same gene pool, so I knew it was theoretically possible for me to have that experience. I didn't know how to do it when I was young, but seeing her being such a success as a human being was a good guidepost. And then also a Sunday school teacher I had when I was very young. I think I was maybe 8, and it was a German immigrant couple, Mr. John and Greta Forster, and they taught at the People's Church in uptown Chicago. And Mr. Forrester always said, well, let me set this up. The church was predominantly white immigrants, and there are a few, brown kids such as myself that were always like the rejected stepchildren. Nobody wanted us there. They always told us, sit down, be quiet, shut up, and, just mad at us for no reason. But here's Mr. Forrester, who was like them. He was older. He was an immigrant. He was not a person of color, but he was the most loving human being that I had encountered, because we didn't get hugs in our family or kisses or anything like that, no warm words. But he just was accepting of whatever we got into, us acting out as children and breaking toys and getting into fights. He never once had a bad word. And he always exemplified, his favorite saying is, God is love. And he just exemplified that. So, here's a human being that was living in the same circumstance, the same neighborhood that we were living in, but he wasn't reflecting that anger and that violence that so many people were. So it was nice having them in our lives, that you could see that there was another way for human beings to live. He was a big role model.
I remember reading your book. You said that your rowing teacher in college taught you about teamwork. They were probably around down the road at schools and colleges and throughout your life, people that influenced you like that. Remember that person in the school in Chicago that says, look around you. Look around you, who you're with. So it's your choice. Remember that story?
I think you might be referring to the police officer that arrested me.
Yes, that too.
Okay. Yeah. So myself and some friends were out at a Sears department store, and that had there were a couple of white friends with me, and then there was myself. And my friends, they were going through the little cafe area in the store, and they were just being hooligans. They were throwing paper cups at each other. They were taking the ketchup packets, and and then they were shooting. They would take the straws, ball up the paper, and were shooting spitballs at each other. And so they're just running wild, and and I was early teens, but I still remember saying, okay, this is going to go nowhere, nowhere good. So I removed myself from them. So I backed away, and I kept them in eyesight, but I was just browsing, just walking around, looking through the shelves, just trying to not get caught up in their craziness. And then I noticed a security guard staring at me. So, of course, I ignore him for a while, and I'm just walking up and down the rows, and he follows me row by row, just mad dogging me the whole time. So now I'm pissed because this guy's, staring at me and being a jerk, and my friends are over there doing whatever craziness they want to, and he's completely ignoring them, and he's just fixated on me. And you could hear him shouting and screaming and knocking things over, but he's still paying attention to me, not to them. Anyway, so finally, they leave the store, I leave the store. And then the guy starts calling me names as I'm walking out of the store. So, of course, I start calling him names. Long story short, we get into a fight. His friend comes out. So I'm fighting. I'm this little, maybe 15, 16-year-old. And I'm fighting these two big security guards. And unfortunately, they win. And they wound up handcuffing me over a steam pipe in the basement of the store. And they just left me hanging there for probably about an hour until the police came. So the police came, they took me, put me in the back of the padded wagon and gave me one of those rough rides through alleys and over potholes and hitting the brakes and going around corners fast. And so I'm handcuffed to the back, bouncing around the interior of this thing. Get to the police station. Finally, there's a detective that was going to do all my paperwork. And after being handcuffed to the bench there for like another hour or so, he brings me to another room, sits me at his desk, and he starts taking my information, my name and all that. And then he stops and he says, so why were you doing what you were doing? And I said, I wasn't doing anything. And he says, well, you're obviously here, so you're doing something. I said, no, I was literally not doing anything. And then he asked me what happened. I told him the story. And he said, well, I believe you. He said, but unfortunately, A, it's your word against the security guards, and there's two of them. And B, he said, look at the guys you're hanging around with. He says, and the quote that I always remember is he said, if you hang around with shit, you smell like shit. And at the same time, I was mad at him for referring to my friends as shit, but he wasn't wrong because, the way of saying it is, I've heard people say, if you hang with dogs, you get fleas, right? That kind of thing. So guilt by association is what I learned. And if I'm hanging out with friends that are doing, questionable things, then that makes me a part of questionable stuff. So that planted the seed in my head that I needed to rethink my life choices as far as friends and associates goes.
Yeah. When you finish reading a book, you would want to say, I enjoyed reading a book. I can't, I loved your style of writing. It's a conversational style.
Mm-hmm.
If you are reading Stolen, you feel you are part of your gang, meaning friends.
Yeah, good.
What I am impressed the most is who you are right now. From how you started your life, being abused from 2 years old. I am so impressed. You have done so many different things. We don't have time right now. You will definitely come back to talk about other things, acting, social media marketing, this and that, many things I don't even know about. You're writing new books. You are a phenomenal friend. And you live here in Sonoma. Tell me about how do you enjoy Sonoma? What do you do when you're not at work?
Sonoma is such a beautiful city. It does a good job of just being itself. It doesn't try hard to be San Francisco or New York or Chicago or anything like that. Sonoma is Sonoma. It's very unique in that way, and it's quaint and small and relatively quiet, which is nice. It's still the fact that I've worked here 5 years, but I've only lived here a little over 1 year.
Oh,
So there's still a lot that I'm getting to know. So yeah, I like to explore. We'll go to different places and visit different places and cruising down and saying, oh, that's a neat shop. I haven't been in there, and drop in. But I spend a lot of time writing, so I'm either at the library or Pete's or Sweet Peas or one of the coffee shops. It's just nice to get out and write somewhere different. So yeah, spend a lot of time bicycling. Try to get that in maybe 3-4 times a week.
We're talking motorcycle, right?
No, actually, this is bicycle. Yeah,
Okay. What happened with your motorcycle?
Oh, I still have a motorcycle. Yeah, I haven't ridden that as much in the cold, cold mornings to work these days. So, yeah.
Of course, we're being spoiled. We actually have rain today in February. Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Have you ever gone hiking? That's what I do. Hiking Montini Overlook Trail.
Yeah, the Overlook Trail is beautiful. I've done that.
Bike path.
Things. There's so many things to do as far as if you like outdoor activities. There's so much biking. There's road biking. There's mountain biking. There's hiking, and miles and miles of trails. So yeah, and then of course the motorcycle is perfect place for motorcycling because just outside of town you have twisties and it's beautiful.
Twisties.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That
I'm
sounds
not a fan
good
of
to
I'm not a
me.
fan of long straight highways. I need some turns, some hills.
No, I'm sure. You need some excitement like you didn't have enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, such a pleasure. Always a pleasure seeing you and chatting with you.
Thank you. But I wanted to mention when you showed the cover of the book and you read the title "Stolen" and referring to stolen childhood, but also those shoes on the cover were stolen, and that was a story that's in the book, but that's also one of the stories that you and I connected on. So, yeah.
Yeah, we have several stories that we have similar stories. I actually had a dream. I don't know if I told you. I never had the guts to tell you. I dream things.
Mhm.
Dream marketing about my business. One night, I truly had a dream, Eddie,
Mm.
because we have similar stories and we come from two different places in this globe. Two cultures, two countries, two everything, completely different. Just imagine as an actor, the stage, real stage in a theater. So you are on one side of the stage, I'm on the other. While you're telling your story from early childhood, I am quiet with very little light on and very little movement, almost no reaction. Maybe sometimes I would nod or be sad or happy. And then we switch. I tell my story, for instance, about my shoes. And then you are dark and quiet. At the end, I am not sure how we would meet. At the end, it's a theater, of course, how we would meet in this life as we did meet in Sonoma. And I saw this two people with a hard history and don't let me cry, not cool,
It's
and
okay.
trauma, pretty much, to just meet and hug and stay in the middle of the stage with no words.
That could be poignant.
Let's do this.
Or
Tell
we have
me.
the beginning with one story and then the other story, and then in the middle we talk about recovery, about healing, and about how those stories changed us.
Yes, that
Please.
was mine. I knew you were a genius.
Hey, it was your idea, so
Let's do this. We have a local theater here. I don't know if they need us, but
it could be a fun project to work on. So,
yes. Okay, promise.
all right.
Oh my God, I love you. Virtual hug, Eddie. Thank you so much for this conversation. Hope to see you soon, and let's do this again, and let's do our project. Don't tell anyone.
All right.
We keep it a secret. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me.